March 2019. The fog rolled thick over the Marina district, as it had done thousands of mornings before, but this Wednesday would shatter 42 years of carefully constructed lies. At 6:47 a.m., 3 unmarked vehicles from the San Francisco Police Department's cold case unit pulled up outside a restored Victorian on Divisadero Street. Inside, 76-year-old renowned painter Marcus Theodore Ashford was preparing his morning coffee, unaware that forensic genealogy had finally connected him to a crime he thought buried with the Summer of Love detective Sarah Chen had been awake since 4 a.m., reviewing the case file one last time. The DNA match had come back with 99.97% certainty. After 4 decades of dead ends, technological advancement had accomplished what traditional detective work could not. As she approached the ornate front door, she thought about Caroline Grace Whitmore, the vibrant young woman whose life had been stolen on an August night in 1967, and whose family had waited more than half a lifetime for this moment. If you're interested in true crime cases with details that mainstream media overlooks, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story goes deeper than anyone imagined. Caroline Grace Whitmore was born on April 14, 1944, in Palo Alto, California, to Dr. Robert James Whitmore, a respected cardiologist at Stanford Hospital, and Margaret Ann Whitmore, a former concert pianist who taught music at a private academy. She had one younger brother, Thomas Robert Whitmore, born in 1947. From her earliest years, Caroline displayed an unusual combination of her father's analytical mind and her mother's artistic sensibility. Standing 5 feet 6 inches tall, with distinctive auburn hair that caught copper highlights in the sun, and hazel eyes that seemed to change color with her mood, Caroline had a presence that made people remember her. She could walk into a room and everyone would gravitate toward her, her childhood friend Patricia Morrison recalled in a 2010 interview. Not because she demanded attention, but because she genuinely cared about every person she met. She'd remember details about your life that you'd mentioned once, months ago. Growing up in the comfortable upper-middle-class environment of 1950s Palo Alto, Caroline attended Castilleja School, where she excelled in both academics and arts. She graduated as valedictorian in 1962, delivering a speech about the responsibility of privilege that would prove prophetic. Her family's financial stability allowed her freedoms many young women of her era didn't enjoy, but Caroline never took this for granted. She tutored underprivileged children on weekends and organized fundraisers for local community centers. By 1965, Caroline had enrolled at San Francisco State College, majoring in fine arts with a minor in social work. She moved into a small apartment at 847 Haight Street, in the neighborhood that would soon become synonymous with counterculture revolution. Her parents worried about the area's changing atmosphere, but Caroline thrived there. She worked part-time at the psychedelic shop on Haight Street, not for the money, but because she believed in the community's idealistic vision of peace and social change. Caroline saw beauty in everything, her professor, Dr. Helena Vasquez, stated in a 1967 police interview. Her paintings weren't technically perfect, but they had soul. She painted people that society overlooked: homeless veterans, elderly shopkeepers, children playing in rundown parks. She wanted her art to mean something. In the summer of 1967, Caroline was working on her senior thesis exhibition, a series of portraits titled Invisible San Francisco, featuring people living on society's margins. She dreamed of opening a community art center where underprivileged children could learn painting and sculpture for free. She had already secured a promise of funding from a local philanthropist and had scouted potential locations in the Fillmore district. Her boyfriend of 8 months, James Patrick Sullivan, a law student at UC Berkeley, described her as the most optimistic person he'd ever known. They had talked about marriage after his graduation in 1968. During the summer of 1967, Caroline's routine was structured around her art. She woke early, usually by 6:30 a.m., and painted in the morning light that flooded her apartment's single large window. By 10 a.m., she'd walk to Café Trieste for coffee and to sketch patrons. Afternoons were spent either at the psychedelic shop or volunteering at the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, which had opened that June. Evenings varied, sometimes gallery openings in North Beach, sometimes quiet dinners with James, sometimes poetry readings at Citylight's bookstore San Francisco in 1967, was a city in transformation. The Haight-Ashbury district, once a quiet Victorian neighborhood, had become ground zero for a cultural revolution. An estimated 100,000 young people flooded the area that summer for what would be remembered as the Summer of Love. The population of the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood swelled from around 15,000 permanent residents to nearly 75,000 during peak months. The streets filled with music, art, drugs, and an idealistic belief that love and community could change the world. But beneath the flowers and psychedelic posters, darkness grew. The infrastructure couldn't handle the influx. Housing was scarce, sanitation inadequate, and drug use escalated beyond marijuana and LSD to heroin and methamphetamine. The free clinic treated thousands of cases of drug overdoses, malnutrition, and sexually transmitted diseases. Violence increased. The neighborhood that preached peace was becoming dangerous. Golden Gate Park served as both gathering place and temporary home for hundreds of young people. The Panhandle, a narrow 8-block strip of parkland extending east from the park, hosted free concerts and be-ins. The Fillmore Auditorium and Avalon Ballroom pulsed with music from the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, and Janis Joplin. Within blocks existed a strange juxtaposition: families who had lived in the neighborhood for generations, suddenly surrounded by a youth movement that seemed to have appeared overnight. The artistic community was equally complex. Established galleries in North Beach and Union Square viewed the Haight-Ashbury artists with suspicion, dismissing much of the psychedelic poster art as commercial kitsch rather than serious work. Yet within the counterculture, a genuine artistic renaissance was occurring. The San Francisco Art Institute became a meeting ground between traditional and experimental artists. Underground newspapers like the Berkeley Barb and San Francisco Oracle featured artwork that would later be recognized as culturally significant. It was in this charged, chaotic, creative environment that Caroline Whitmore tried to build bridges between worlds. August 12, 1967 began as an ordinary Saturday for Carolyn. The day would be meticulously reconstructed through witness statements, though the evening hours would remain frustratingly incomplete. 6:45 a.m. Caroline's downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Chen, heard Caroline's footsteps above her apartment, the familiar morning routine beginning 8:15 a.m. Caroline arrived at Café Trieste on Vallejo Street in North Beach. The owner, Giovanni Giotta, remembered her ordering a cappuccino and a cornetto. Sitting at her usual window table with her sketchbook 9:30 a.m., fellow artist and friend Rebecca Steinberg joined Caroline at the café. "We talked about her thesis show," Steinberg told police. "She was excited but nervous. She showed me sketches of 3 new portraits she wanted to complete. She seemed completely normal, happy even." 11 Habwam. Caroline and Rebecca walked to the San Francisco Art Institute for a student exhibition. Multiple witnesses placed them there until approximately 1:30 p.m., 2:15 p.m. Caroline returned to her Haight Street apartment. Her landlord, Mr. Eugene Walsh, was repairing a porch railing and exchanged pleasantries with her. "She was carrying groceries," he stated. "She mentioned she was cooking dinner for someone but didn't say who." 4:30 p.m. James Sullivan called Caroline from Berkeley. In his police statement, he said they talked for 20 minutes about his upcoming exams and her thesis work. She mentioned expecting a visitor that evening to discuss a possible gallery showing of her work. She didn't mention a name, telling James it was probably nothing but worth hearing about. This would be the last confirmed conversation with Caroline. 7:45 p.m. Mrs. Jen heard Caroline's apartment door open and close, followed by footsteps. Possibly 2 sets, though she couldn't be certain. 9:20 p.m. A neighbor across the street, Michael Torres, noticed Caroline's lights were still on, but heard no music, which he found unusual as Caroline typically played records in the evening. 11:35 p.m. Torres noticed Caroline's apartment lights had been turned off. The next morning, Sunday, August 13th, began with growing concern that would soon turn to horror. James Sullivan arrived at Caroline's apartment at 10:15 a.m. as they had planned to visit the DeYoung Museum. When she didn't answer his knocking, he asked Mr. Walsh to check on her. Walsh unlocked the door at 10:22 a.m., and both men immediately knew something was terribly wrong. The apartment's single main room, which served as both living space and art studio, was in disarray, unusual for Caroline, who kept her space meticulously organized. Her easel had been knocked over, tubes of paint scattered across the wooden floor. Most disturbing was the trail of blood leading from the center of the room toward the small bedroom alcove. Walsh immediately called the police, while Sullivan, against his better judgment, moved toward the bedroom. At 10:47 a.m., officers Daniel Martinez and Robert Kowalski of the SFPD arrived at the scene. What they discovered in Caroline's bedroom would haunt them for the rest of their careers. Caroline Grace Whitmore lay on her bed, having been strangled with what appeared to be a length of canvas stretcher bar, still wrapped partially around her neck. The medical examiner would later determine that death occurred between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. the previous evening. She had put up a fight. Defensive wounds on her hands and arms indicated she had struggled with her attacker. The crime scene revealed both violence and a strange attempt at staging. 7 specific pieces of evidence were catalogued that morning. First, Caroline's portfolio of thesis paintings had been rifled through, with several canvases removed from their stretchers and rolled up, though not taken from the apartment. Second, a wine bottle and 2 glasses sat on the small kitchen table, one glass with lipstick marks matching Caroline's shade, the other wiped clean. Third, her address book lay open on the floor near her body, as if dropped during the struggle. Fourth, a man's monogrammed handkerchief was found under the bed, with the initials M.A. embroidered in dark blue thread. Fifth, several of Caroline's paintings showed slash marks, as if attacked in rage. Sixth, her small jewelry box had been opened, but nothing appeared stolen. An opal ring her grandmother had given her still sat inside. Seventh, and perhaps most puzzling, someone had carefully washed the 2 dinner plates and placed them in the drying rack. The scene felt personal. Detective Frank Morrison, the lead investigator, wrote in his case notes. This wasn't a random attack or a robbery gone wrong. Someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to have dinner with, had killed her. And then they'd tried to clean up, tried to make it look like something it wasn't. But rage had made them sloppy. By noon, word had spread through the Haight-Ashbury community. A crowd gathered outside the apartment building, some crying, others standing in stunned silence. The summer of love had claimed another victim, though this death was different from the overdoses and accidents that had become increasingly common. This was murder, deliberate and brutal. The neighborhood's sense of invincibility cracked that day. "We thought we were building utopia," one resident told the San Francisco Chronicle. "We forgot that darkness exists everywhere, even in paradise." Mrs. Margaret Whitmore received the call at 1:30 p.m. Her screams brought Dr. Whitmore running from his study. They drove to San Francisco in a daze, arriving at the Hall of Justice at 3:15 p.m. to formally identify their daughter's body. "She looked peaceful," Margaret would later tell a reporter, which somehow made it worse. "Like she was just sleeping, and this was all a terrible mistake." Thomas Whitmore, just 20 years old and home from his sophomore year at Stanford, learned about his sister's death when his parents called from the city. He immediately got in his car and drove north. Arriving at the police station at 5 p.m., "Have you ever received news that changed your entire life?" Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. The San Francisco Police Department in 1967 was overwhelmed and under-resourced. The department had approximately 1,800 officers, serving a city of 750,000 residents, a ratio that had been adequate in quieter times, but was increasingly strained by the cultural upheaval of the mid-1960s. The homicide detail consisted of just 16 inspectors, handling an average of 70 murders per year. The summer of love had added new pressures. Missing persons reports, drug offenses, and public disorder cases flooded the system. Detective Frank Morrison, 42 years old, and a 20-year veteran, caught the Whitmore case. His partner, Detective Raymond Lucas, was 36 and had been with homicide for 8 years. Both men were traditional police officers, uncomfortable with the counterculture, but professional enough to investigate thoroughly, regardless of the victim's lifestyle. Morrison had an 86% clearance rate on homicides, one of the highest in the department. He was methodical detail-oriented, and deeply committed to justice. The technological limitations of 1967 forensic science would prove crucial to how the case unfolded. DNA analysis didn't exist. Fingerprint databases were entirely manual, requiring hours of comparison work. Blood typing could exclude suspects, but rarely provide positive identification. The monogrammed handkerchief found under Caroline's bed yielded no usable fingerprints. It had been handled too much or deliberately wiped. The wine glasses provided one partial print and blood typing that indicated the visitor had type A blood, shared by roughly 40% of the population. The canvas stretcher bar used as a weapon bore smudged prints that were unusable. Morrison and Lucas began building a suspect list based on the evidence that Caroline had known her killer. They interviewed over 60 people in the first week: friends, family, neighbors, fellow students, regular customers at the psychedelic shop, other artists. 5 individuals emerged as persons of interest, each with apparent motive and opportunity. First was James Patrick Sullivan, 24 years old, Caroline's boyfriend and a third-year law student at UC Berkeley. The statistics were damning. In most female homicide cases, the intimate partner was responsible. James had been in Berkeley the night of the murder, studying at the law library with 2 classmates who confirmed his presence from 7 p.m. until midnight. Still, investigators pressed him. Could he have driven to San Francisco, killed Caroline, and returned? The timeline was theoretically possible but extremely tight. His car showed no evidence of recent high-speed driving. His shoes, clothing, and apartment revealed no blood evidence. Blood typing showed James was type O, not type A like the wine glass drinker. "I loved her," James told detectives, breaking down. "I was going to propose at Christmas. Who would do this?" After 2 weeks of intensive investigation, James was excluded as a suspect. Second was Marcus Theodore Ashford, 31 years old, an established painter with a growing reputation in San Francisco's art scene. Marcus had been Caroline's informal mentor since she'd attended one of his gallery openings in January 1967. He taught an occasional workshop at the San Francisco Art Institute, where Caroline was enrolled. Several of Caroline's friends mentioned that Marcus had taken special interest in her work, offering criticism and encouragement. Marcus lived in North Beach, owned a studio space in a converted warehouse on 3rd Street, and was married to Elizabeth Ashford, a wealthy socialite whose family money had helped launch his career. Investigators discovered that Marcus had purchased Caroline's paintings, 3 pieces over 6 months, paying $50 each, which was generous for student work. He had written her letters of recommendation for grant applications. Some classmates whispered that his interest seemed more than professional, though Caroline never indicated any romantic involvement. "Marcus was kind to me," Caroline had told Rebecca Steinberg. "He treats me like a serious artist, not just a student." On the night of August 12th, Marcus claimed he had been at home with his wife, hosting a small dinner party for 6 people. All 6 guests confirmed his presence from approximately 7 p.m. through midnight. Elizabeth Ashford provided a detailed account of the evening, the menu, the conversations, the guests' arrival and departure times. Marcus's blood type was A, matching the wine glass, but so were millions of other people. The handkerchief initials M.A. seemed damning, but Marcus demonstrated that he always used handkerchiefs embroidered with his full initials M.T.A., not M.A. He provided examples from his possession. Additionally, the handkerchief found at the scene was inexpensive cotton, while Marcus used only silk handkerchiefs, a pretentious detail that nonetheless seemed verifiable. "I admired Caroline's work," Marcus told detectives. "She had raw talent that could have been refined into something truly special. Her death is a tragedy for the art world." His alibi appeared solid. After 3 weeks, Morrison reluctantly moved on to other suspects. Third was David Michael Anderson, 26 years old, who worked at the psychedelic shop alongside Caroline. David had been arrested twice for marijuana possession and once for assault, though charges in the assault case had been dropped. Co-workers described tension between David and Caroline in the weeks before her death. "He asked her out multiple times," store manager Patricia Hoffman stated. "She always declined politely, but he kept pushing. Finally, she told him firmly she had a boyfriend and wasn't interested. He didn't take it well, David's whereabouts on August 12th evening were initially unclear. He claimed he'd been walking around the city thinking, which provided no alibi. His studio apartment was searched. Investigators found no physical evidence connecting him to the crime. David's blood type was B, excluding him as the wine drinker. 3 witnesses eventually came forward, placing David at a poetry reading at the Coffee Gallery in North Beach from 8 p.m. until nearly 11 p.m. The timeline made it virtually impossible for him to have committed the murder. After a month of investigation, David was excluded. 4th was Martin Alexander Pierce, 43 years old, a businessman and art collector who had approached Caroline at a gallery opening in July, expressing interest in purchasing several pieces from her upcoming thesis exhibition. Martin was married with 3 children, lived in Pacific Heights, and ran a successful import-export business. He had no criminal record and was well regarded in San Francisco society. Several people remembered Martin's interaction with Caroline at the July gallery opening. He was very focused on her, another artist recalled. It seemed professional, but there was something intense about it. Caroline had mentioned to friends that Martin had called her several times to discuss potential purchases and had suggested meeting to view her work in progress. Could the dinner on August 12th have been with Martin? Investigators interviewed Martin on August 20th. He acknowledged meeting Caroline and expressing interest in her work, but denied any meeting on August 12th. "I was in Los Angeles on business," he stated, providing airline tickets, hotel receipts, and the names of business associates who confirmed meetings throughout that weekend. His blood type was O. His handkerchiefs bore his full initials, MAP. Martin's alibi was verified through multiple independent sources. By mid-September, he was excluded as a suspect. 5th was Robert Chen, 19 years old, the son of Caroline's downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Chen. Robert had recently returned from Army basic training and was awaiting deployment to Vietnam. Mrs. Chen mentioned to police that her son had developed a crush on Caroline, though she didn't think Caroline was aware of it. "She was always kind to him," Mrs. Chen said. "When he came home on leave, he was different, more aggressive, more angry. The Army changed him." Robert admitted to investigators that he found Caroline attractive, but insisted he'd never acted on these feelings. On the evening of August 12th, Robert claimed he'd been at a bar in the Mission District with Army friends, but he couldn't remember the bar's name, and his friends had since shipped out to Vietnam, making verification impossible. Robert's blood type was A, matching the wine glass drinker. He owned handkerchiefs with his initials RC, but investigators theorized he could have deliberately used someone else's handkerchief to mislead police. For 2 months, Robert remained the primary suspect. Then, in late October, a letter arrived at the police department from Robert's commanding officer in Vietnam. Robert had shipped out on August 10th, 2 days before Caroline's murder. Army records confirmed his presence at Fort Ord from August 2nd through August 9th, then immediate deployment to Vietnam on August 10th. He had never been on leave in San Francisco. Mrs. Chen, in her grief and confusion after the murder, had misremembered her son's timeline. Robert was definitively excluded. By December 1967, the investigation had stalled. Every promising lead had evaporated. The mysterious visitor who had dinner with Caroline remained unidentified. Detective Morrison submitted a comprehensive report recommending the case remain open, but acknowledging that without new evidence or witnesses, progress was unlikely. The Whitmore family was devastated by the lack of answers. The case went cold, not from lack of effort, but from the fundamental limitations of 1960s investigative techniques. The partial fingerprint couldn't be matched without a suspect to compare it against. The type A blood narrowed nothing. The monogrammed handkerchief led nowhere. The San Francisco Police Department's resources were increasingly stretched by rising crime rates and civil unrest. By early 1968, with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and subsequent riots, the Whitmore case file was moved to the cold case archives. The last significant investigative activity occurred in March 1968, when Morrison re-interviewed Marcus Ashford, still bothered by something he couldn't quite articulate about the artist's too-perfect alibi. But without evidence, suspicion meant nothing. The case was officially classified as unsolved on June 15, 1968, joining hundreds of other cold cases in the department's basement filing system. What time is it where you're watching this? Caroline's family would mark time differently after this. Everything became before or after August 12, 1967. Dr. Robert Whitmore, 51 years old when his daughter was murdered, threw himself into his medical practice with obsessive intensity. He began working 16-hour days, taking every shift offered, volunteering for the most difficult cases. He couldn't save Caroline, his colleague Dr. Stephen Marks observed, so he tried to save everyone else. Robert funded a $10,000 reward for information leading to his daughter's killer, an enormous sum in 1967. He personally reviewed the police file quarterly, calling Detective Morrison every few months to ask if there had been any developments. The answer was always no. In 1972, Robert suffered a heart attack at 56. He survived but was forced to reduce his hours. The reward money remained unclaimed. "Every day I wake up and she's still dead," he told a reporter in 1975. "Every day her killer is still free. That knowledge is a weight I carry in my chest literally now." Robert died of a second heart attack in 1981 at age 65, having never learned who killed his daughter. At his funeral, Thomas Whitmore found an envelope in his father's desk drawer labeled "For Caroline's Killer." Inside was a single handwritten note. "I forgive you because she would have, but you stole something irreplaceable from this world, and I hope you cannot live with that." Margaret Ann Whitmore, 48 when Caroline died, stopped teaching piano immediately after the murder. She couldn't bear the sound of music, which had once connected her to her daughter. She became a volunteer victims advocate, helping other families navigate the trauma of losing loved ones to violence. "Margaret transformed her grief into service," said Ruth Eisenberg, who worked with her at the San Francisco Victim Support Center. She sat with dozens of families, holding their hands through the worst moments of their lives. She understood their pain in a way no one else could. Margaret started an annual memorial scholarship at San Francisco State College in Caroline's name, funding art students who demonstrated both talent and commitment to social justice. Over 3 decades, the scholarship supported 42 students. She attended every scholarship award ceremony until her death in 1998, at age 79. She always brought one of Caroline's paintings to display, rotating through the works that had been returned to the family after the investigation concluded. "Caroline believed art could change the world," Margaret would say in her brief remarks. These students carry that belief forward. Thomas Robert Whitmore, 20 years old when his sister was murdered, abandoned his pre-med studies at Stanford. He couldn't follow his father's path. Medicine reminded him too much of death. Instead, he changed majors to criminal justice, driven by a single purpose: to understand how his sister's killer had escaped justice. He graduated in 1969 and joined the FBI in 1971, specializing in violent crimes investigation. He became an expert in cold case methodology, contributing to the development of the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program in the 1980s. Tom lived his entire career for Caroline, his wife Jennifer Whitmore explained in a 2019 interview. Every case he solved was for her. Every killer he caught was the one he couldn't catch, her killer. Thomas worked on hundreds of cases over 30 years, developing a reputation for persistence and analytical brilliance. He never forgot his sister's case. Every few years he would request the file from SFPD, review it with fresh eyes, and return it with notes suggesting new avenues of investigation. Nothing ever panned out. Thomas retired from the FBI in 2001, but he didn't stop working Caroline's case. He hired private investigators, consulted with forensic experts, and monitored advances in DNA technology. "If it takes until my last breath," he told his daughter, Caroline Elizabeth Whitmore, named for her aunt, "I will find out who killed her." Thomas was 68 years old when he finally received the phone call he'd waited 52 years to get. Detective Sarah Chen called him on March 13, 2019, to inform him that forensic genealogy had identified his sister's killer. The case was reviewed multiple times over the decades, each review reflecting the technological advances of its era. In 1977, SFPD conducted a 10-year review using updated fingerprint analysis techniques. The partial print from the wine glass was re-examined using enhanced magnification technology. No match was found in the expanded fingerprint database. The review concluded that without new witnesses or evidence, the case remained unsolvable. In 1987, during the 20th anniversary review, investigators attempted to use newly available computerized record systems to cross-reference the case details with other unsolved homicides. They discovered 3 murders in California between 1965 and 1969 with superficial similarities: young women, strangled, artistic communities. Task force investigators examined potential connections, but found no definitive links. Each case appeared to have different circumstances and suspect profiles. In 1997, the 30-year review coincided with the beginning of DNA analysis in cold cases. Detective Maria Santos requested that all biological evidence from the Whitmore case be located and preserved for potential future DNA testing. The evidence had been stored in a basement facility, and some items had deteriorated. However, the wine glass with the partial fingerprint and blood residue had been sealed in a container and remained intact. DNA was successfully extracted and typed, creating a profile of the unknown male who had been in Caroline's apartment that night. The profile was entered into CODIS, the national DNA database, but produced no matches. The killer either had no DNA in the system or had never been arrested for a crime requiring DNA collection. In 2007, the 40th anniversary review employed advanced forensic techniques, including digital enhancement of the crime scene photographs. Investigators discovered details previously missed. In the background of one photograph, a small abstract painting hung on Caroline's wall that appeared to be signed. Enhanced magnification revealed the signature, MTA, 1966. Marcus Theodore Ashford had given Caroline one of his paintings. This wasn't inherently suspicious. He had been her mentor, but it demonstrated a closer relationship than he'd initially indicated. Investigators attempted to locate Marcus for re-interview, but he had moved from San Francisco to Seattle in 1985, then to Portland in 2001. He was 71 years old, still painting, still exhibiting. Detective Santos traveled to Portland to interview him. "Yes, I gave Caroline a small piece," Marcus confirmed. "I gave paintings to several promising students. It was a way to encourage them." His manner was cooperative but slightly dismissive, as if the detective was wasting his time with ancient history. "I've thought about Caroline over the years, of course. Such a waste of talent. But I've told the police everything I know, multiple times. I had nothing to do with her death." Without new evidence, the interview led nowhere. In 2012, Thomas Whitmore, now retired and increasingly frustrated, hired a private forensic genealogist to review the DNA evidence. The field was emerging as a powerful tool for identifying suspects in cold cases, using DNA to build family trees and locate relatives of unknown subjects. However, the genealogist explained that in 2012, the public DNA databases were still too small and the methodology too new. "Give it a few years," she told Thomas. "This field is advancing rapidly. If your sister's killer has relatives who've submitted DNA to ancestry databases, we'll eventually find them." By 2015, the San Francisco area had transformed beyond recognition from the city Caroline had known. The Haight-Ashbury district had gentrified, with Victorian houses selling for millions of dollars. The counterculture had become commercialized tourist attractions. The median home price in San Francisco had exceeded $1 million. The tech boom had reshaped the entire Bay Area economy and culture. Few residents remembered the Summer of Love as anything other than historical trivia. Yet, in the Whitmore family, time had stopped on August 12, 1967. Thomas was now 73 years old. His sister would have been 71 if she had lived. He tried to imagine what her life might have been. Marriage, children, grandchildren, decades of artistic creation. Instead, there was only absence, and a file box in his home office containing copies of every document related to her murder. What's the weather like where you are right now? The Whitmores experienced endless winter, waiting for the spring of justice that never came. On January 8, 2019, the breakthrough finally occurred. though it came not from traditional police work, but from advances in consumer genetics. Detective Sarah Chen, 39 years old and a 7-year veteran of SFPD's cold case unit, had been assigned the Whitmore case in 2018 as part of a department initiative to apply forensic genealogy to unsolved homicides. Chen had specialized training in the technique, which had recently solved the Golden State Killer case, and was revolutionizing cold case investigation. Chen sent the DNA profile from the Whitmore case wineglass to Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. The process involved uploading the DNA profile to public genealogy databases like GDmatch, where people voluntarily share their DNA results to find relatives. The DNA doesn't need to match exactly. Third cousins or more distant relatives can provide enough genetic overlap to build a family tree leading to the suspect. On January 8, 2019, Parabon genealogist Dr. Rebecca Morrison contacted Chen with significant news. The DNA had produced matches to 17 people in the database, ranging from second to fourth cousins. By meticulously constructing family trees for each match and identifying common ancestors, Morrison had narrowed the suspect pool to 3 possible individuals, all descended from a couple named Harold and Esther Ashford, who had lived in Oakland in the early 1900s. One of the 3 names stopped Chen's heart. Marcus Theodore Ashford, born September 3, 1942, now 76 years old, still living in the San Francisco Bay Area. In fact, he had moved back from Portland to San Francisco in 2017. Forensic genealogy represented a quantum leap in investigative capability compared to 1967 technology. Traditional DNA matching through CODIS required the suspect's DNA to be in the law enforcement database, which only happened if they'd been arrested and sampled for specific crimes. Forensic genealogy bypassed this limitation by using publicly available databases that millions of people had voluntarily joined to explore their ancestry. The science relied on the same principles as ancestry testing. DNA segments are inherited from parents, shared with siblings, and progressively diluted with each generation, but still detectable in distant relatives. The mathematics of genetic inheritance are precise, Dr. James Chen, forensic geneticist, explained to the San Francisco Chronicle. We can calculate the probability that 2 individuals share a common ancestor based on how much DNA they share. With multiple distant relatives identified, we can triangulate back through generations to find the common ancestor, then work forward through descendants to identify possible suspects. The accuracy rate of forensic genealogy, when properly conducted, exceeds 99%. The technique had solved over 150 cold cases by 2019, from murders to sexual assaults to identifying remains of unknown victims. It had limitations. It required sufficient DNA quality and quantity, and the suspect needed to have relatives who had submitted DNA to public databases. But when conditions were right, it was devastatingly effective. For 50 years, this killer was invisible, Dr. Morrison stated. But DNA is a biological witness that never lies, never forgets, and waits patiently for science to advance enough to reveal its secrets. With the genealogy results pointing to Marcus Ashford, Chen reopened the 1967 investigation file with new eyes. Marcus Theodore Ashford had been 31 years old in 1967, established enough to have credibility, but young enough to have unchecked ambition. He had been questioned and cleared based on his dinner party alibi. But Chen noticed something Morrison had documented in 1967. The alibi seemed rehearsed, too perfect. The guest's statements matched too precisely, as if coordinated. Chen obtained a discarded coffee cup from Marcus in February 2019, collecting it from a cafe where he was known to have breakfast 3 times weekly. The DNA matched the 1967 wineglass profile with 99.97% certainty. Chen had her man Marcus Theodore Ashford, was born in Oakland, California, the only child of Harold James Ashford, an accountant, and Marion Louise Ashford, a librarian. He showed artistic talent early, attending the California College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland, graduating in 1964. His early work was conventional, technically proficient but unremarkable. He moved to San Francisco in 1965, renting a studio in North Beach and gradually building connections in the city's art scene. In December 1965, Marcus married Elizabeth Ann Hartford, daughter of shipping magnate Charles Hartford. The marriage was advantageous. Elizabeth's family money funded a larger studio, higher quality materials, and connections to wealthy collectors. By 1967, Marcus had shown his work in several galleries and sold pieces to serious collectors. He was building the foundation of what would become a distinguished career. After Caroline's murder, Marcus's career accelerated. His 1968 exhibition, Urban Shadows, received critical acclaim. The San Francisco Chronicle art critic wrote that Ashford had found his voice, depicting the darkness lurking beneath the city's idealistic facade with disturbing honesty. The paintings were darker than his previous work, more emotionally raw. They sold quickly. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Marcus Ashford became increasingly prominent in West Coast art circles. His work appeared in major museums. He won the prestigious San Francisco Arts Commission Award in 1975 and the Guggenheim Fellowship in 1982. He taught masterclasses and served on museum boards. By the 1990s, his paintings regularly sold for six figures. A 2015 retrospective at the De Young Museum, the same museum Caroline had planned to visit the day her body was discovered, celebrated his 50-year career. But there was a sinister dimension to Marcus's life that only became clear after his arrest. He had maintained contact with the Whitmore family for decades. In 1970, he attended a memorial exhibition of Caroline's work organized by Margaret Whitmore, expressing sympathy and praising Caroline's talent. In 1985, he donated $5,000 to the Caroline Whitmore Memorial Scholarship. In 1997, during the 30th anniversary memorial service, he gave a speech about Caroline's promise as an artist and the tragedy of her lost potential. He looked Margaret Whitmore in the eyes and lied about murdering her daughter. "That's the part I'll never understand," Thomas Whitmore said after the arrest. "He could have disappeared from our lives. Instead, he inserted himself into our grief over and over. What kind of person does that?" Dr. Catherine Morrison, forensic psychologist, offered insight. Psychopathic individuals often derive satisfaction from proximity to their victims' families. It provides narcissistic gratification. They experience a sense of power from the secret knowledge that they caused the pain they're witnessing. Some are compulsive about it, unable to stay away, like an arsonist returning to watch the fire. For Marcus, attending memorials and contributing to Caroline's scholarship may have been a way to relive the murder, to experience the impact of his actions. Marcus had also maintained a facade of devoted family man. He and Elizabeth remained married until her death from cancer in 2014, 53 years of marriage. They had 3 children, Jonathan, born 1968, Catherine, born 1971, and Michael, born 1974. All 3 children pursued successful careers, completely unaware of their father's dark secret. Marcus had 7 grandchildren. He attended family gatherings, celebrated holidays, appeared in hundreds of photographs smiling with his family. He was, by all accounts, a loving grandfather. His participation in the art community remained active into his 70s. He volunteered as a mentor to young artists at the San Francisco Art Institute, the same institution where Caroline had been his student. He served on the board of the Haight-Ashbury Arts Coalition, dedicating himself to preserving the neighborhood's artistic heritage. He gave interviews about the Summer of Love, positioning himself as a witness to history, carefully editing out his role as Caroline's killer. In 2005, Marcus published a memoir titled Painting San Francisco, 5 Decades of Art and Change. The book contained a chapter about the summer of 1967, describing the cultural ferment and artistic experimentation of the period. He wrote 2 paragraphs about Caroline Whitmore, a talented young student whose life was tragically cut short. I remember her enthusiasm and idealism. Her death represented the dark undercurrent that ran beneath the era's optimism. We in the artistic community grieved her loss. He signed copies of this book at readings, selling a memoir that contained calculated lies about a woman he had murdered. The evidence against Marcus extended beyond DNA. After identifying him as the suspect, investigators obtained search warrants for his home and storage units. They discovered Caroline's missing paintings, the canvases that had been removed from their stretchers in her apartment on the night of the murder. Marcus had kept them for 52 years, rolled up in a tube in a storage unit containing his archived works. Why had he taken them, but left them at the scene? Why had he kept them all these decades? Perhaps as trophies, perhaps as a twisted memorial, perhaps because destroying them felt like destroying evidence. The discovery confirmed that Marcus had been in Caroline's apartment during or after her death. At 7:15 a.m. on March 13, 2019, Detective Sarah Chen, accompanied by 6 officers and FBI agents, including the recently retired but specially requested Thomas Whitmore, executed the arrest warrant at Marcus Ashford's Divisadero Street home. Marcus answered the door in a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, utterly unprepared for the moment that had stalked him for 52 years. "Marcus Theodore Ashford, you are under arrest for the murder of Caroline Grace Whitmore," Chen stated, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Marcus's first words were not a denial, but a question. "How did you find me?" "DNA," Chen answered. "Science caught up with you." Marcus set down his coffee mug carefully, extended his wrists for handcuffs, and said nothing more. The reaction in San Francisco's art community was seismic. Marcus Ashford had been a respected figure for 5 decades. Galleries that represented his work immediately pulled his paintings from display. The De Young Museum removed his pieces from its permanent collection. The San Francisco Art Institute stripped his name from its donor wall. Collectors who owned his work faced an ethical dilemma. Was it appropriate to sell paintings created by a murderer? Some donated works to be auctioned with proceeds going to victims' advocacy organizations. Others kept them, viewing the art as separate from the artist's crimes. "I can't reconcile the man who mentored me with the man who killed Caroline Whitmore," said artist Jennifer Huang, who had studied under Marcus in the 1990s. "He encouraged my work, wrote recommendations for grants, celebrated my successes. How do you process that the person who helped shape your career is a murderer?" Marcus's neighbors in the Marina district expressed shock and disbelief. "He was the friendliest person on the block," said Martha Stevens, who had lived next door for 12 years. "He helped me carry groceries. He always asked about my grandchildren. This doesn't make sense." Another neighbor, David Martinez, recalled, "Marcus organized a neighborhood watch meeting just last year. He talked about keeping each other safe. The irony is grotesque." His children released a statement through their attorney. "We are devastated by these allegations. We cannot reconcile the father we knew with the crime described. We are cooperating fully with authorities and ask for privacy as we process this nightmare." The statement notably did not proclaim his innocence. Have you ever had someone close to you turn out to be completely different than you thought? Share your theories in the comments below. The trial of Marcus Theodore Ashford began on September 15, 2019, in San Francisco Superior Court, 52 years and 34 days after Caroline's murder. Judge Patricia Wong presided. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Michael Torres, specializing in cold cases. Marcus was represented by defense attorney Sarah Goldstein, known for taking on challenging cases. The prosecution's case rested on 3 pillars: DNA evidence, the recovered paintings, and circumstantial evidence demonstrating motive and opportunity. Torres methodically presented each element. Dr. Rebecca Morrison testified about the forensic genealogy process, explaining how Marcus's DNA was identified through his relatives. The DNA match between Marcus and the wine glass was presented with statistical certainty. The probability of the DNA belonging to someone other than Marcus was less than 1 in 500 billion. The recovered paintings provided physical evidence linking Marcus to the crime scene. Art experts testified that the paintings had been stored improperly, showing damage consistent with having been rolled up rapidly and stored in a tube for decades. Why would Marcus have Caroline's paintings unless he had taken them from her apartment? Torres presented testimony from individuals who recalled Marcus's behavior in the weeks after the murder. Gallery owner Patricia Romano remembered Marcus seemed different at an opening in September 1967, more confident, more intense. His work had changed too. It had a darkness that wasn't there before. Another artist, Michael Brennan, recalled Marcus making an odd comment in 1968. "We were discussing Caroline's murder, and Marcus said something like, 'Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you trust.' At the time, I thought he meant generically. Now it feels like a confession." The prosecution argued that Marcus had killed Caroline in a rage after she rejected his romantic advances. His marriage to Elizabeth was financially advantageous, but emotionally empty. He became obsessed with Caroline, his talented young student who represented youth, idealism, and artistic authenticity. When she declined his interest, he couldn't accept the rejection. The dinner on August 12th was his attempt to seduce or pressure her. When she refused, he killed her. The defense strategy focused on creating reasonable doubt about the DNA evidence and alternative explanations for the paintings. Goldstein argued that while the DNA proved Marcus had been in Caroline's apartment drinking wine, it didn't prove he killed her. Perhaps he had visited earlier in the day or week, and someone else killed her later. The wine glasses could have been from a previous occasion. Regarding the paintings, Goldstein suggested Caroline might have given them to Marcus before her death, or he might have acquired them after her murder through estate sales. The prosecution countered by demonstrating that Caroline's estate inventory, completed by her family, showed those specific paintings as missing. They had never been in estate sales. The defense also attacked the forensic genealogy method as relatively new and potentially unreliable. Goldstein brought in defense experts to question the methodology. However, prosecution experts convincingly demonstrated the scientific validity and the extensive verification process that had been followed. The most dramatic testimony came from Thomas Whitmore, 73 years old and visibly emotional. He described 52 years of searching for his sister's killer, of his parents dying without answers, of building his entire career around the hope of solving Caroline's case. He looked directly at Marcus and said, "You didn't just kill my sister. You killed part of my parents. You've haunted my family for 3 generations. And all those years you pretended to care. You pretended to honor her memory, while you knew exactly what happened to her." Marcus never testified. He sat silently throughout the trial, showing no emotion, maintaining the same detached artistic demeanor he had cultivated for decades. On November 7, 2019, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty of murder. In the first degree, Judge Wong sentenced Marcus to life in prison without possibility of parole on December 3, 2019. In her remarks, she stated, "Mr. Ashford, you robbed Caroline Whitmore of her life, her art, her future. You robbed her family of 52 years of truth. You built your success, your reputation, your comfortable life on the foundation of her death. This court finds your conduct not only criminal, but morally reprehensible beyond measure. You will spend whatever remains of your life contemplating the destruction you caused." Marcus showed no reaction to the sentence. He was remanded to San Quentin State Prison, where he remains as of this recording. The impact of Caroline Whitmore's murder and its eventual solution rippled through multiple domains. Dr. Robert Whitmore died in 1981, never knowing justice would eventually arrive. Margaret Ann Whitmore died in 1998, 17 years before DNA technology would identify her daughter's killer. But they left legacies that transcended their grief. The Caroline Whitmore Memorial Scholarship has now supported 78 art students over 42 years. Many have become successful artists, educators, and advocates for social justice through art, carrying forward Caroline's vision. The case has become a teaching example in forensic science programs nationwide, demonstrating how technological advancement can solve seemingly impossible cold cases. The FBI's Cold Case Unit, which Thomas Whitmore helped build, has used forensic genealogy to solve over 300 cases since 2018, bringing closure to families who had waited decades for answers. San Francisco passed the Caroline Whitmore Act in 2020, requiring all evidence in unsolved homicides to be preserved and regularly reviewed as new forensic techniques become available. The law ensures that future Caroline Whitmores won't wait 52 years for justice. The San Francisco Art Institute established the Caroline Whitmore Prize for Socially Engaged Art, awarded annually to an artist whose work addresses social justice issues. The prize includes a $10,000 grant and a solo exhibition. In the award's description, Caroline is remembered as an artist who believed that beauty and justice were inseparable and whose life was stolen before she could fully realize that vision. For Thomas Whitmore, the arrest and conviction provided a resolution he had pursued for 52 years, but not the peace he had imagined. I thought I would feel relief, maybe even happiness, when we finally caught him, Thomas reflected in a 2020 interview. Instead, I feel tired. Justice doesn't bring Caroline back. It doesn't give my parents the years they spent in anguish. It's just an ending to one chapter of an endless story of loss. But I'm grateful. Caroline is no longer the forgotten victim of an unsolved case. Her killer faced consequences. That matters even if it doesn't heal everything. If you found this deep dive into Caroline's case compelling, please subscribe to this channel for more true crime stories that honor victims and explore how justice, even delayed, can prevail. Share this video with anyone interested in how modern science is solving cold cases that haunted families for generations. And leave a comment below. What do you think drove Marcus Ashford to attend Caroline's memorials for decades? What kind of person does that? How should we view the art created by someone capable of such violence? Your thoughts and theories keep these conversations alive and ensure that victims like Caroline Grace Whitmore are never forgotten. Until next time, remember that truth, like DNA, waits patiently to be revealed.